Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Room for Everybody. Today, I'm really excited to be in conversation with Acacia. Acacia, can you just describe some of the identities that you hold to our listeners?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Acacia Bettencourt, and my pronouns are she, her. I identify as a cishet woman in Washington, D.C., and I'm a designer and a visual designer, and that's professionally been my identity for my entire career. And personally, I identify as a multi-ethnic mixed person who is both white and Cuban. So when people ask my racial identity, I just say it's complicated.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm in an interracial marriage and am a mom to be.
How exciting.
Thanks.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I think it's fun that we're both in the design space, but approaching different avenues and areas of influence. So I'm interested, what kind of led you towards inclusive design in the visual design field?
Yeah, I think that my, especially, racial ethnic background is something I've really, especially in the last decade or so, have really thought a lot about and wanted to talk more about with people, and has informed my lens of how I see the world. And also, I've worked in a lot of different scenarios as a designer, particularly, I've worked at small design studios and agencies and things, and also in house at a nonprofit, particularly a global nonprofit that was sort of dealing with communities all around the world and a lot of different cultural identities. So at that point, I really realized there's a lot of room for improvement in the design world and the things that we make and how we make them in terms of being more equitable and inclusive and respectful of people's different identities. And so I would say since maybe 2014, the focus of my career has really been the intersection of DEI and design. How do we sort of weave our personal identities into the work that we do to make design in the world, in the broader world, more inclusive?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy 10-year anniversary of working
Oh,
in
thanks.
that space.
Thanks. A decade sounds like a long time, but I'm proud of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I think it's interesting that you mentioned working in the global nonprofit space and how it sounded like interacting with a variety of people, like kind of highlighted the need for inclusion. I think I have a similar life experience of also interacting with a lot of different people. When I encounter someone whose social circle has a lot of kind of the same people, it seems like those people tend to not see the need for inclusion because the thing that's working for the similar group of people, including them, like is working. And so they aren't aware of the variety of needs.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I actually just taught a sort of training and workshop about accessibility on Friday to a group that does a lot of facilitating sessions for groups of the public, members of the public, who obviously have all different identities of different kinds, different types of disability and language status and, physical needs and neurodiversity. And a lot of that group is, largely white millennials. And I tell them, like, it's not everybody only has their identity and the lens through which they see the world. Everyone is only one
Mm-hmm.
person. So it's not your fault if you're non disabled or you are neurotypical or whatever the case is. But there are ways to perspective and to have conversations that make you think in a different way and have a different mindset to be more inclusive.
Absolutely. So if you had a top three of things that you could recommend to people to implement in inclusive visual design, what would those be?
Yeah, I think the top one that comes to mind that is almost the easiest, but most important is text legibility and contrast. So
Mm,
making sure that literally any text that is being used in your design and read by anyone in your audience has enough color contrast between the color of the text and its background. This is basic accessibility, not only for people who have color blindness or low vision or any kind of vision issues, but also this is easier on everyone's eyes. Anyone who is older or is far away from whatever your design is, it's really important to make sure all of your text is legible, is big enough, is dark enough to read, or light enough, depending on the background. So
Mhm.
that's the first thing. The second thing, which is a huge passion and focus of mine, is the photos that you use. So I teach workshops on how to judge and choose which photos to use for your content or your design, and how to make sure you're not, inadvertently reinforcing stereotypes or tokenizing someone in a photo, but also learning how to see the subtleties within things like stock photos of how that reinforces sort of like racial power dynamics or gender norms and things like that. So you can really do a lot in terms of inclusion and increasing representation in the right way through photo choices. And while text is important, humans don't read as easily as they sort of make very, very quick judgments based on an image and what they see. So the photos are actually sort of the first thing that your brain absorbs when you see something, and then you read the words. So photos, critically important and something to be really careful of in terms of the choices. And then third, this is not only for visual design, but really for just design in general, no matter what you're making. And I always use the term designer very loosely. It's like if you're making something for people, whether that's content or a product, something visual, then it has to really have its functionality first before its aesthetic. So that making sure that you're not just testing that for yourself, but testing it for everyone. A lot of sort of examples of this, like the example I always really like to use is Band-Aids, where Band-Aids are supposed to be skin color, quote unquote, but whose skin color is that? A
Right.
designer of some kind chose what color that is, and that doesn't match everybody. A Band-Aid is meant to blend in with your skin tone. So if you're making something that is meant for everyone, you really have to test it with everyone to make sure that it functions as intended and really functions for your audience and is usable for everyone. Because if you don't, then it's really easy to, even if it's not intentional, make people feel very excluded.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a great example. I do like the kids' Band-Aids with, like, the fun designs on them.
Yeah, then you don't have to worry about skin tones at all. You can just make it fun.
Right, exactly. Yeah, thank you for sharing those. I think that is really important, especially that last point. Like, I also would apply to interior design and thinking about how different people encounter space and, like, what is the variety of needs and how one space doesn't actually easily work for everybody without that intentional piece as well.
Yep.
What is your relationship with your physical space currently?
My relationship with my current space is that I'm in it 98% of the time. I am one of the fortunate people who gets to work from home. So I'm a contractor. I'm very, very fortunate and grateful that I get to make my own schedule and decide what my own day looks like and my own space and how I operate within it. So my home office is our spare bedroom, and I've chosen it as my workspace because during the day, it's by far the brightest spot in our house. The
Mhm.
rest of our townhouse is like quite dark and doesn't give me energy because it doesn't have a lot of sunlight. So I sit in the sunniest spot in the house, and that sort of helps my energy level and my creativity and my ability to work during the day. And it's filled with plants, as is the rest of my house. And I've really fit it to my needs because I have had chronic back pain since I was in middle school, really. And in a lot of the different work environments I've had, I've really struggled with what desk I have and what chairs I have. And currently, in my current office, I have like 3 or 4 different sitting devices and configurations of how I can sit. I have a sit stand desk, and it's just been a lot of trial and error over a lot of years to get comfortable because it's been a really big barrier for me to not be able to sit for a long period of time for many hours out of the day. And so It's been a lot of like experimenting and making it my own for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I like that you've been listening to your body throughout the process and prioritizing what you needed. I'm sure it did take a lot of trial and error to figure out how to adjust the space to your needs, but it sounds like you've arrived at a configuration that works better for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a designer through and through. That's what I went to school for, but really I sort of secretly want to be an inventor. And I think it's I think an inventor and a designer are actually pretty closely related. And so I didn't want to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a fancy desk chair that may or may not work. And so I've really approached it as like, what do I need? What makes me the most comfortable for my specific body? I've tried a million different, lumbar supports and different types of chairs and switching between positions. And I have one of those kneeling chairs. I have a footstool. I've tried like one of those foot hammock things. I've tried heating pads during the day, all of these different things. And I do think I've hit a sort of gold mine because a friend of mine told me that she sits on a tractor stool, which is like a, if you imagine a tractor, they have these metal seats that are like butt shaped and they have holes in them. And they were invented because tractor users or farmers have to sit in them all day, every day. And it's really kind of grueling. And the hard surface is actually really good for your posture and your back. So I got one of those stools off Craigslist, but it didn't have back support. And I really needed that. I felt like I was slouching on this stool. And I have a chair that I like the back support and I like the lumbar support. And one day the idea kind of occurred to me, why don't I just unscrew the top of the stool, the hard part, and put it on top of my very soft desk chair? So now I've sort of retrofitted this Frankenstein chair to be exactly what I need. And I don't want to brag about the miracle it's done for my back pain, but in almost 2 decades of like working at a desk, this is the most comfortable I've been. So, and I
Oh,
really didn't spend very much on it. I think it was $25 to get the stool, and I only needed the top part. So it's kind of fun to do the experimenting, even with like limited resources, to make yourself more comfortable.
for sure. Yeah, that's a very creative solution. I like that a lot.
Right.
Yeah. I also like you mentioning being close to light and the plants in your space because I do feel like that makes a big difference. Like when you're inside a space that has no windows, nothing else that's alive, when you emerge from that, you're like, wow, there's a whole world out here. So remaining connected to that, I think is really important.
Yeah, and building in breaks for myself throughout the day to go outside and get away from the screen. And also, I think for those of us that work from home, it's really important to like set the boundaries of like I typically don't really work, even though I can take my laptop anywhere, I typically don't work anywhere else in the house because I want
Mhm.
to sort of maintain that space of like when I'm in my office, it's work mode, and then the
Mhm.
rest of the house is not work because I'm really in my house the majority of the time. So it's nice to have that separation.
Yes, absolutely. Is there anything else that you want to share with people about inclusive design or about yourself?
I think just, when we think about inclusive design, as I've trained a lot of groups and talked to not only a lot of different design teams, but other teams within companies and other designers and people at nonprofits, I think there's a lot of anxiety around hoping that you're doing it right and
Mhm.
wanting to sort of be inclusive or not. And there's no such thing as being 100% inclusive. I tell groups there are 8 billion people on the planet and everybody's different and everybody's changing all the time. Everybody has different needs and, their bodies are changing and we're in different stages of life. So there's not really a way, particularly in physical spaces, but just in general, to be super inclusive of everyone in every way. But I think if we sort of think of it as being inventors and being imaginative about how we can make spaces and designs more inclusive and being open to talking about what people need and starting there with what would make this better, and welcoming that as an opportunity and sort of like in a design challenge, that's a great place to start. And at least, nothing's perfect, but I think there are a lot of little ways to make the world more inclusive for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. And sometimes there's conflicting needs in one space or in one design. I think something that I try to encourage clients towards is flexibility and having a variety of options when they can, so that you can kind of curate different things for different people.
Yeah, and giving people choice when you can, or being upfront about what you can accommodate and what's not going to be possible, and being creative and collaborative about arriving at a solution with people. So a lot of times there's a solution for someone and their particular needs that may not be that hard to do or may be relatively simple that could make their experience a little bit better. But inclusive design and accessibility really is about everybody, no matter who they are and sort of what they've got going on and what their identities are, being able to participate equally and comfortably, whatever that means for them. So it's about asking what people need and being creative with coming up with solutions for that.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for all the wisdom that you've shared, kind of just continuing the conversation here around inclusive design. I really appreciate it. If people are interested in working with you or talking with you further about this, where can they find you?
So the best place to find me is at brevitywit.com. That's the small company that I work for, and we do inclusive design and DEI sort of systems change and strategy. So that's brevitywit.com. And I'm also on Instagram. I have an account where I talk about different inclusive design and the subtleties of design and advertising, especially as sort of racism and sexism show up in different ways in the visuals around us in our media. And that account is called Spotting Racism.
Perfect.
Hello, dear listener. Thank you for tuning in for another episode. This podcast is produced by Eden Environments, an inclusive and sustainable interior design firm. Our human-centric design strategy creates spaces that are fat and neurodivergent friendly, trauma-informed, and sustainable. If that sounds like what you need, contact me through Eden's website to get started. For the latest updates, sign up for emails and follow along on your favorite social media platform. And until we meet again, I wish you gentle days.